Welcome to the Family Beacon podcast from Minnesota Family Council with hosts Grace Evans and Moses Brattrud. Stay informed on the top stories on life, family, and religious freedom. Get the facts, stand for truth. Hello and welcome back to the Family Beacon podcast. I'm Grace Evans and I'm here with my co-host Moses Brattrud. Today, if you're watching on YouTube, and yes, we actually do have this go live on YouTube every single week. So if you want to see our beautiful faces, let me tell you, this hair takes a long time to curl. Just teasing, it's short. But still, if you want to see our beautiful faces, you can go to our YouTube, Minnesota Family Council, subscribe, and see us talk through things every single week. That way you can tell how much we're looking at our notes, right, guys? Yeah. Also, if you were watching, you would notice that Moses is wearing a new blazer, you guys.
I'm all dolled up today.
This is a pivotal moment in the Family Week in history because I think every single episode...
Except one.
Oh, really? Except one.
Mm-hmm.
Moses has worn a gray blazer, and I, of course, have changed my outfit because it's hard being a girl. This is the patriarchy.
Well, I'm pretty sure that people judge women when they wear an outfit over and over again.
I think they do.
They just don't judge men. Men have a uniform.
I don't think they notice as much.
Yeah.
Also, it's the majority of people that watch our show, our podcast, is guys that are around my age, and so I think that they probably aren't like, oh, what's this guy wearing for his suit? Mm-hmm. And also, I think it goes with a lot. But anyways, he's wearing a floral tie, you guys, and a nice blazer that's navy blue, so you're really missing out if you're not watching this.
Yeah, definitely go to YouTube and check that out. I have to say the reason I'm doing that is because I will be heading straight from work to the Minnesota Leadership Forum, our first ever debate that we're holding for the conservative candidates for governor in Minnesota, the leading conservative candidates. So we're so excited about that.
I will also be there.
And Grace will be there. And by the time you guys see this, the recording of that will be available. So hope you check that out. I think it's going to be an amazing event.
Yeah, we'll have it linked in the description box. But yeah, if you're watching on YouTube, again, make sure you subscribe, click that notification bell so that you get notified every single time we post. Follow us on Instagram at MN Family Council. We'll have that tagged on the screen for you. To watch exclusive clips, and make sure if you're on Apple Podcasts, you give us that 5-star review if you really like this podcast. All right, with that being said, we're going to be talking about a lot today. We're going to be talking about how critical race theory is infiltrating Minnesota schools. We're also going to be talking about Kamala Harris's comment on abortion. She said that women are going to die if we make abortion illegal. And we'll be talking about Kamala's lack of support, as well as a mother that wins with a daughter who was getting swept into the gender identity movement. So we'll be talking about
Such
a lot.
Great story.
Yeah, a great story. Moses, why don't you just go ahead and start with what's going on in Minnesota with critical race theory? I heard about this from one of my classmates, and I knew I had to send you the link to it. I mean, we knew that this was happening, but there was a recent article kind of outlining what's going on.
Yeah, so I have to say props to our friends and allies at the Center for the American Experiment, which is a Minnesota-based think tank, and they focus on a lot of conservative issues, for example, crime prevention and education, just being two that they focus on. And I've worked closely with them on this issue, on the social studies standards for the state of Minnesota, and they've been doing amazing yeoman's work getting us out to people across the state. So the draft social studies standards, I mean, it sounds like a snooze fest, but it's actually, unfortunately, it's another culture war, another venue for the culture war for the progressive component of our society. So the Minnesota Department of Education, every 10 years, they review and revise the social studies standards, which are the standards to which K-12 academic curriculum is held in public schools in the state of Minnesota. So it's this boring statutory process, and it goes through all these revisions. And when the first draft came out, it was like really bad. They took out
terrible.
I think they took out the studies of the Holocaust or something like that. It was just like
it was revisionist history. They were rewriting history.
It was and remains revisionist history. Unfortunately, I think I'm gonna find out if this is 100% true, but I believe they added the Holocaust back in. But what they didn't do is they didn't change the basic framework on which this was based, and the basic framework is moving from a standard in which history, social studies. And I feel really steamed about this because I just finished my dissertation for my history, my master's in history.
Wait, let's just take a moment of silence for that. That's just amazing.
I don't want silence. I want applause.
Okay, well,
Jack, insert applause into the clip. Thank you.
Well, add some applause. Also, if you're watching, wherever you're watching, go do the clapping emoji.
Yes, yeah, thank you. I would love.
Honestly,
I would love. I
need to read it.
I will send it to you,
Okay.
Grace. I really enjoyed writing it. I think I hope it'll get a good grade. I think it's possible that I'll graduate with honors.
Wow.
So we'll see.
Sometimes I forget that you're also a student, even though you're quite a bit older than me.
That's true.
Gray hair.
Yes.
He also struggles through paper writing.
I didn't have as much gray hair before I started graduate school.
Oh, I thought you didn't have as much gray hair before we started doing this podcast.
Okay. No, back to the topic at hand. So, because I'm into history, this really steams me up. The fact about the past is that there are this is a debate among historians. Is the past knowable to any extent? Are there real true facts that actually happened? And you'll even find some radical historians who basically say, we can't actually know that the Holocaust took place. I know. I
know it's ridiculous.
I know that's ridiculous. They're not Holocaust deniers. They're just saying we can only have facts about the Holocaust.
Right.
We can't even construct this true narrative about it. Okay, so I'm
getting
off on a little.
Long ago. But something else too, the proponents of critical race theory will argue, which we have another episode on critical race theory. This will not be the last time we talk about it. Hannah Jones, I think that's her name, she wrote the 1619 Project, which is a curriculum widely distributed in the U.S. to students, and it argues, and as do most critical race theorists, that the most significant thing about America was slavery, that we were founded on slavery, that American history should be read starting at 1619 when the first slave ship arrived in Jamestown, and that we're not unique for our abolition of slavery, but rather the fact that slavery existed. They actually even argue that they argue that the war for independence was fought to preserve slavery and not for fighting for freedom. And so it is very, very dicey. One of my professors went on a whole rant for a whole lecture about this, actually.
Wow, really? Was that Hansen?
Yeah, Brian Hansen.
Oh, man.
He's amazing.
I'd love to have him on the podcast because that's something we need to talk about. I
would love to have him.
I read a great book just absolutely refuting the entire 1619 Project. So we'll talk about that in a future episode. But let's talk about these standards.
Yeah.
So the way how the social studies standards connect to critical race theory is through this idea of ethnic studies. Now, I have absolutely no problem with kids in Minnesota schools having to learn about the history of slavery, the history of Jim Crow, the history of the Civil Rights Movement. I learned about those things when I was a kid.
In fact, they should learn about those things.
That's absolutely part of our history. It absolutely should be. So, but ethnic studies is different. So I want to read from some of the standards here. So Standard 23 is about identity. Analyze the ways power and language construct the social identities of race, religion, geography, ethnicity, and gender. Apply these understandings to one's own social identities and other groups living in Minnesota, centering those whose stories and histories have been marginalized, erased, or ignored. So, as Grace was saying, with the 1619 Project, the primary story is not about how our founding fathers created and maintained a system of ordered liberty that preserved the rights of both the majority and the minority within the English natural common law tradition, and slavery was an aberration of that, which was eventually corrected through a horrible, bloody civil war. So it's not like our history is perfect, but Grace said, as Grace said, the 1619 Project is about centering. That's the phrase, centering slavery. Slavery is the predominant, the most important fact about American history. So by the same token here, as we look at the study of history in Minnesota, the most important fact is not the explorers coming here, settling, making Minneapolis and St. Paul great cities, the discovery of iron ore on the range, the incredible agricultural wealth of the state and the stories of the immigrants from, like, my own ancestors who came here from Norway, but rather the story is about people who have been marginalized, erased, and ignored. And I assume that in this context that would mean Native Americans. But I have to say, I would imagine and hope that their stories are already being told. So this idea that we need to literally like what I think is so damaging about this is you're essentially you're putting these two stories in opposition to each other, like as if you can't tell the story of the settlement of Minnesota and how Minnesota became a great state and a state that fought very hard against slavery, by the way, in the Civil War, without erasing or ignoring the Dakota and Lakota and Ojibwe people who lived here. So but you actually can tell both those stories and should tell both those stories. So I think it is a power move. It's saying we're decentering the story, the common narrative of settlement and growth, and recentering the history of the marginalized and oppressed. But that actually doesn't come without a cost. We should be talking about people who are marginalized and oppressed, but we should not be silencing the stories of the majority of Minnesotans who are descended from either white settlers or black Americans who came here from the southern United States to find jobs and so forth. So I just want to I could go on about this, but I want to give some really particular examples about what this means. So kindergartners will have to, quote, retell a story about an unfair experience that conveys a power imbalance. So we're teaching kindergartners about power dynamics and the idea of racial power and economic power. And I just think that's, well, first of all, just a fundamentally Marxist thing. I mean, I'm not saying that's necessarily the worst thing in the world, but that's what it is. It's Marxist.
Yeah.
I mean,
and it's
undeniably.
teaching kids to have a certain worldview too.
Yeah.
Because a worldview is like a lens through which you see the world. And so these kids are going to be taught to see the world through systems of the oppressed versus the oppressor, rather than seeing it as it truly is. And I'm not saying that oppression doesn't exist in the world, because it definitely does, and we need to call it out. But it isn't correct to assert that that's the entire way that we should view humanity, and also that oppression in the way that they use it is as prevalent as they think it is, because it's really not. And even something that they'll claim, proponents of critical race theory, Moses, is that we need to deconstruct America entirely because of its racist founding / racist roots, which is interesting because we had amazing founding ideals: life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, equality. Obviously, we were failing to live up to those standards. It's a blot on our history, a dark spot on our history. But we eventually did uphold our virtues and those values. And I mean, still, we're not fully upholding them with the sanctity of the preborn.
Yes.
And so we are failing in that way because we're not giving them life. But our ideals, the ideals that we were founded on, were good, even though we weren't fully living by them at our founding.
That's right. And, that's just the case with any human society. Like, human societies are built by sinful people, often with not the best motives, and the American founders had great motives, honestly, and they weren't trying to preserve slavery. They were trying to preserve the rights of the individual, because that was what they believed. That was informed for some of them by the Christian faith. For some of them, it was informed by a sort of Enlightenment rationalism. But the upshot of it was that we have the greatest system of government that the world has ever known, and almost every country in the world now claims to or is something like an American-style democracy. It's pretty cool to see. Even the United Kingdom becomes more like an American democracy over time, although, of course, it still has a queen.
Because absolute monarchy is not a good thing.
Absolute monarchy, yeah. No.
I just am still in my finals mode, because I had this oral exam with that history professor I was telling you about, and that was like one of the questions, like explain the rise and fall of absolute monarchy, and then another one was talk about revisionist history and why it's wrong. It was a very fun final, honestly.
That does sound fun.
I was kind of geeking out. Anyways, continue.
So let me give you a couple other examples. So high school students will be required to, quote, examine the construction of racialized hierarchies based on colorism and dominant European beauty standards and values, unquote. So the idea there is that our society constructs a skin color hierarchy. That's, I think, what they mean by colorism. And so light-skinned people, even who are non-white light-skinned people, are better, more beautiful, and so forth. And I just think, first of all, I call it into question whether that's actually taking place today. And second of all, I question whether that's something that Minnesota high school students have a limited time in which they need to know the things that will prepare them to succeed in college, succeed in life. And is this one of those things? I would question that. And then we also have a couple things that are absolutely completely silent on. So for example, the draft standards are silent on America's role in World War II. Students learn nothing about President Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, Stalin, D-Day, September 11th. Yeah.
Erasing that much of our history?
George Washington, Paul
Wow.
Revere, Bunker Hill, Lexington, and Concord are never mentioned. Instead, students analyze dominant and non-dominant narratives, quote, examine Black, Indigenous, or women's perspectives, quote, identify and evaluate how governmental and non-governmental institutions have responded to foreign and domestic terrorism in the United States, including xenophobia and Islamophobia.
So my question would be, this is like the ethnic studies standard, right? If they're getting all this ethnic training, are they still getting actual history in their history classes, or does this kind of take the place of history?
It definitely takes the place of history.
Okay, so there's
fourth graders,
no history class. It's just ethnic studies. Is that...
Well,
that's
it depends on the
obviously-
school. I think that schools do have a certain amount of latitude as to how they implement these standards.
Okay.
But in terms of like standardized testing and how the schools themselves are graded by the Minnesota Department of Education, all of these things are, and this just continues. Ancient Egypt, the Roman Empire, the Middle Ages, the French Revolution, Napoleon, the Russian Revolution are not mentioned.
Yikes.
Students learn nothing about World War II. The Holocaust gets superficial treatment. The draft does not mention the Soviet Union, the Chinese Cultural Revolution, Pol Pot in Cambodia, North Korea. There's a tone of outrage towards U.S., quote, imperialism and, quote, oppression. So in fourth grade, you're supposed to be able to identify what native land your school was built on. I think we talked a couple weeks ago about a friend of mine who's a teacher at a charter school in the Western Metro. And it's a charter school, so it's a classical charter school. So you'd expect there to be a certain amount of, I guess, conservatism just baked into the curriculum because you're studying the classics. However, stop me if I said this before, but there were all these second graders, and they were going to be separated based on sex. For some, the boys were going to do one thing, the girls were going to do another thing, as part of like a pageant or whatever. And there's one second grader who identifies as a they. And it's just like, that, of course, is something that the second grader would have had no idea if they weren't taught.
Well, it's indoctrination, honestly.
It's indoctrination.
Kids,
So let me break this in for a landing because we could go on. I think the point here is that education is so important, and this is just scraping the surface of the problems with this curriculum. It's a great moment to remind our listeners that you should not put your kids in public school in Minnesota. The schools want to teach your children lies about our past. I mean, and I'm putting that as nicely as I can. They do obviously think they're doing the right thing, but they want to take children out from the authority of their parents and expose them to things like these strange curriculum ideas, or like explicit comprehensive sex education, because they think they know better. They think they know better than parents. And we need to continue fighting about this. I want to say thank you so much again to Kathy Kirsten, my friend and the senior fellow at the Center for the American Experiment, who brought this to light, and we're so grateful that they're continuing that fight. And we just need Minnesotans to be aware that this is what's going on in our schools. Okay, so moving from Minnesota to the national level, we've had a lot of people comment about abortion in the last few weeks because of the Dobbs v. Jackson case. Vice President Kamala Harris said a couple things that were a little bit suspect. Can you tell us about that?
They're just not true. They're not based in fact.
Yeah.
So Vice President Harris recently was interviewed, and she said that she's very concerned about the Dobbs v. Jackson case. She said, quote, this is Life News reporting. She said, quote, "I don't mean to sound alarmist. I mean this. Women will die. Of course, she's saying that if Roe v. Wade is overturned, women will die. She also said, in particular, quote, women who don't have economic resources and can't then travel to places or somehow have access to safe reproductive health care, including abortion, women will die. It's not an extreme statement. In fact, it's a fact. So I have a lot to say. Sometimes I feel like I rant about the same things on the podcast about the pro-life message, but honestly, it never gets old and it needs to be said again and again in response to arguments such as these, because we face these on a daily basis. I think I've debunked this multiple times. Let's start. There's two different things she's kind of playing off here. I mean, obviously, she's lying. This isn't true. But the first thing she's referencing is, what if a mother's life is at risk? Women might die because they might need an abortion, right? Mm-hmm. And the truth is, first we need to start with defining what abortion is. Abortion is the direct and intentional taking and murdering of a child's life. That is what abortion is. When a mother's life is at risk due to a pregnancy, which is very rare, but it does happen, such as with an ectopic pregnancy, in this sort of situation, the egg is not implanted in the uterus where it's supposed to be. Rather, it's out in the fallopian tube. So in this situation, oftentimes the mother's life or the child's life or both is at risk if the pregnancy continues and is carried to full term. In this sort of situation, most often medical health professionals are going to do a preterm delivery in which they're trying to save both the mother and the child. When they do this, they are not going in with forceps and crushing the skull of the child. They are not injecting the child with a lethal injection. Rather, they are doing a preterm delivery, and they will use as much as they can every medical advancement to try to save the life of the precious child. They are not going to kill the child when it comes out or attempt to kill it before it comes out. In fact, they're going to make the child as comfortable as possible, and oftentimes children do survive because the age of viability is being pushed further and further back, earlier and earlier. And so that is not an abortion because it is a preterm delivery and it is not directly and intentionally killing a child. Similarly, people will argue, what if a woman has to go through chemo and she has cancer? And again, a chemotherapy is not the same thing as an abortion because it would not be directly and intentionally killing a child.
Right.
And so she's arguing with, from that standpoint, like sometimes women need abortion. Well, over 90% of medical professionals in the United States agree that abortion is never medically necessary. Mm-hmm. In fact, starting in second trimester, it's always better to deliver the child because there's such a high chance of life outside the womb.
Right.
The second thing, however, she's referring to here, Moses, is, well, what about back alley abortions? This is the argument we hear all the time. Like, if Planned Parenthood or other healthcare providers don't provide abortions to women, women are still going to get them, and they are going to die. Well, that is shoddy data, according to the Washington Post, which is obviously a more leftist reporting group entity. Its fact checker did not find research that could back up these claims that
Whoopsie.
women say what?
Whoopsie.
Yeah, it couldn't back up the claims that women would die in such great numbers. Obviously, women will still attempt to undergo abortions, and they shouldn't because it's not safe for them. But this is what pro-life activists have been saying for years, right? Mm-hmm. Few women died from abortions in the decade prior to Roe, actually, and a rise in antibiotics and medical technology has actually been the biggest factor in the drop in maternal deaths,
right.
Not legalized abortions.
Right.
Furthermore, even if it was true, let's say it's true that every single woman that would get an abortion if it's legal is going to go get one if it's illegal, and they're going to die from it or have serious complications, that would not be an argument for abortion. Obviously, we care for women. I am extremely pro-women, and I want to give them health care. We actually do provide health care for women. The pro-life movement provides free ultrasounds, prenatal care, etc. However, that's not a good argument. It's like saying, well, if we make murder illegal, people are still going to murder people.
Right.
Well, we still need to have an objective moral standard. Government is supposed to be an instrument for our good, instituted by God, to protect against evil, such as abortion, and to promote good. And right now, our country is failing to live up to those values. So ultimately, this falls short. Today, even, women still die every single year from legal botched abortions.
Yes, they do.
But Planned Parenthood never talks about these, right? It even lobbies against legislation to make abortions safer, including annual inspections for abortion clinics,
right.
hospital admitting privileges, and other things.
They want to be able to kill babies up until
Right.
40 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
They want you to never know about it, and they want it to be paid for by your tax dollars.
Yes, they want the money, and that's my closing point on this. Planned Parenthood does not care about women. Don't be bought into this narrative. Vice President Harris does not care about women who are in crisis pregnancies. Planned Parenthood cares about the money, which is why they refuse to enact more safe standards for women. Of course, abortion is never safe.
Yeah.
But they don't actually care about women. This is a red herring argument, meaning they're trying to bring up something that makes us feel empathetic towards women, but in reality, they don't care. And this is an absolutely untrue statement. And
Preach.
it is devastating. Thanks, Moses. It is devastating that our vice president is promoting this absolute lie.
So relating to that, Kamala Harris is our vice president, but there's been some speculation that she might not continue to be our vice president. This is this crazy rumor that's been kind of floating around Capitol Hill. So I want to spill the tea on this a little bit, just to because it's so interesting to just get a little bit under the hood and see what's actually going on, how the sausage gets made, as it were, in D.C. And so unfortunately, well, depending on your point of view, unfortunately, Vice President Kamala Harris has a really weak approval rating. So a USA Today poll last month found her approval rating at 28%, disapproval
so
at
low.
51%. And a conservative poll last week found her at 39% favorable, 57% unfavorable. So higher favorable, but also a higher unfavorable rating. So that's just not good. Her numbers are consistently worse, lower than President Biden's, who is also struggling in the polls. So some of you will have heard that Kamala Harris has lost 3 to 4 senior staffers just in the course of a month. That's never a good sign. When you see staff leaving a political leader, what that means is that they sense a sinking ship. Like you guys have heard of maybe how rats can sense that an earthquake is coming. Mm-hmm. So if they sense that an earthquake is coming, they will leave a building. You can see videos of this, like rats flooding out of a building. And I'm comparing political staffers to that, but
oh boy,
yeah, but there's a sense. So the bitterness, Kamala Harris believes that she's been given a really difficult. She's supposed to be dealing with immigration. Obviously, that's an incredibly difficult issue. She hasn't exactly succeeded in that, and people are saying that that's President Biden specifically sidelining her in favor of Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg, who is much more popular with Democrats as a whole. And he's the Secretary of Transportation, and which is not usually a very glamorous role. But with the Biden administration's emphasis on infrastructure, he will have a very important role to play in the next few years. They want to spend so many billions and billions of dollars on new bridges and such like, which I'm not opposed to. But there's other than also these green energy things, and it's just nuts. But the point is that this was the specific rumor. And so Kamala Harris, before her election as vice president, she was the senator from California, and before that she was the attorney general of California. Mm-hmm. And she was actually a really tough prosecutor when she was in California, which she conveniently has forgotten about. Like, she was very tough on crime, and that image she's tried to really move away from that. She put people behind bars for minor marijuana offenses, and then she herself had more or less admitted to smoking marijuana. So just crazy stuff. But the rumor is that President Biden would appoint her to the Supreme Court.
Yes.
Because she is an attorney, and so in theory qualified, so that he would not have to. This is if he runs again, or maybe even if he doesn't, because to open up the playing field for someone like Pete Buttigieg in 2024 or 2028, who might be more popular. That's if Biden runs again in 2024 and wins. Then
won't he be 86 then? I think he will be.
President Biden, already the oldest president ever elected, would be quite elderly by the end of his term. Wow. So, but he is at this point. They're still talking about him running again because he's sitting as the sitting president. He's not. No Democrat is going to be able to do better than him. When you have a sitting president who doesn't run for re-election, such as you had in 1968 with Johnson, that just did not go well, and Nixon won in a landslide. Okay, so I want to bring this in for a landing. because the way in which our current administration is functioning or ceasing to function is really important, because you might not get that in the mainstream media. This news that there's friction between Kamala Harris, President Biden, and Pete Buttigieg. Those are some of the people identified them as the three most important people in the administration, and they're kind of having a little bit of a cat fight right now. And that has implications on the country. These are three of the most popular people, powerful people in our country. So I wanted to bring that to you because it underscores what Grace has been saying on Kamala being increasingly, I feel, isolated on Capitol Hill. She's lashing out. She's pushing left on issues like abortion. She's saying things that aren't true. And I think that's good for us to know. We need to be watching the political scene so that we just know what's going on, getting the facts, standing for truth, speaking of the truth. What an amazing story this week from a mom who is fighting so hard to save her daughter from gender transition. Yeah. So tell us about that.
Yeah, this article is called What I've Learned, Rescuing My Daughter from Her Transgender Fantasy. We'll have it on the screen right now. We'll also have it linked in the description. It's by Charlie Jacobs. An amazing read. Every single one of you should read it. I think you could probably read it in 10 minutes, maybe even less, depending how fast of a reader you are. But it is just a wonderful testimony to the impact that parents can have on their children, and how your life can be completely turned around if you take the right steps. And it also plays into kind of what Abigail Shrier says in her book, Irreversible Damage. So this mom writes this article. She says it's not a cautionary tale, it's a warning. She says that she talks about her daughter. She was very feminine ever since she was born. She wore all pink. Her room was pink. She insisted that it was pink. She refused to wear anything but dresses until 3rd grade. She avoided boys' toys. She chose tea sets, etc. So very girly. She loved makeup and heels. That abruptly changed when she turned 12. And as her body began to change, she became a bit insecure, as most girls go through this stage. And originally the mom wasn't worried because she knew that it was a normal thing with girls. But then her daughter started getting into anime, cosplaying, and her mom still supported that because it was a part of her creativity coming through. But her mom wasn't aware that anime can actually easily overwhelm young girls, and that there are some very specific ties to gender-bending themes in anime.
Don't let your kids watch anime, okay? Just don't do that. It is not a healthy environment. Let them watch the Miyazaki movies and Avatar: The Last Airbender and nothing more.
Or not even those. The Airbender is so boring. I'm sorry. Maybe I'll get hate for that.
Airbender is one of the best shows ever made.
So bad.
But other than that, and I'm sorry to interrupt, Grace, but other than that, really, the amount of, there's nothing wrong with it as a genre, but it absolutely is a vector for so much nasty stuff that kids then get exposed to.
Yeah.
Just don't let it in your house.
Yep. It's like TikTok. Don't let it in your house.
Good point.
So anyways, at that same time, this daughter was going through Teen Talk, which is a Canada-based program that it provides youth with accurate, non-judgmental information on sexuality, reproductive health, et cetera, body image, diversity, all the trigger words, right? So she went through that with her friends, and when she came back from that training, she and all her friends suddenly used all these words they identified as pansexual, polyamorous, lesbian. No one was just straight or basic or whatever you call it. Mm-hmm. And, Moses and I have talked about this before, the pressure of peer groups and gender dysphoria affecting peer groups. If it's popular among your friends, you are more likely to identify as one of these labels.
Right.
And so then that's when the mom began to be worried because her daughter distanced herself from her old friends. She spent much of her time online. She turned her bedroom into basically a dark cave and redecorated it with skulls. She pierced her nose with a bull ring. She made gross TikTok videos, had vulgar language. She basically became a goth vampire-like creature, the mom says.
And she was sorry, I'm getting ahead of the story.
That's okay. Yeah.
Well, I was just gonna say, and then when the mom found her social media accounts, it just got worse, didn't it?
Yeah. Well, so basically, the summer before the 9th grade, she announced that she was transgender. This girl did. And she began to threaten suicide because her mom wasn't going to use her personal, or I think she did use her personal pronouns and then realized that was wrong. But she wouldn't support her actually transitioning.
Yes.
So eventually the mom managed to get passwords to her social media accounts, and before she had been trying to track her daughter's information, but she didn't know that her daughter had made fake accounts to throw her off her scent, which a lot of children do, so be aware of that. She eventually got into her actual accounts, and what she saw, she says, was jaw-dropping. I'm not going to go into all the details because this is a family podcast, but there is some disgusting stuff, very illegal stuff. She had a Discord server, which should tell you enough, with disgusting groups, disgusting people sending her disgusting things. That's all I'm going to say about that. Absolutely disgusting. And obviously, the mother was shocked. The girls on the server also bragged about different mental illnesses. They talked about which drugs do what. They talked about how they're really boys and not girls. They talked about top surgery, other things. Not going to go into all the details in case you have kids in the car. So her TikTok feed was also filled with a bunch of transitioners talking about how great it is to transition. So much more stuff. So the mom says, I went nuclear. She did what she needed to do, and it had the impact she needed. She took the phone. She deleted all social media off of it. She even blocked the girl's ability to get on the internet. She deleted all of her contacts, changed her phone number. She sat next to her while she was attending Zoom school, because I think this might have been during COVID. She deleted YouTube from all of the TVs. She took every single anime book, all of her costumes, and she banned any friend that she didn't approve of that was a little bit unsavory.
Based.
She also involved the police about the porn, which is also
pornography that had been sent to this girl.
Yeah, which we won't go into details. She, and of course, this relationship with her mom and her daughter was very, very strenuous, and it was not good. The girl hated her mom, just like an addict of a drug hates the person preventing her from getting a drug.
Oh my goodness.
But the mom held her ground despite of the constant verbal abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And after going through many health professionals, she found someone who was out of state to help with this that actually agreed with her that this gender identity, quote unquote, wasn't the actual problem. The problem was insecurity with her own body. Right. So after a year and a half of going through this absolute hardship of being at odds with her daughter, she says, is finally returning to her authentic self, a beautiful, artsy, kind, and loving daughter.
Oh, praise God for
I know. It's amazing. And so it is just a beautiful testimony of sometimes it's really hard if you find yourself in this sort of situation as a parent. I can't imagine, because you want to support your child, you want to love your child, and you don't obviously want them to commit suicide, and that's often what they will threaten. And it's hard, too, because all of these gender therapists are going to be arguing, you're wrong, you just need to love your child, you need to give into this. But this mom was so brave and so courageous, and in the end, she won, and now her daughter is doing so much better. She realizes all of this pain. I mean, her mom has set out different articles talking about the bad side effects. When she drove her to school, she made her listen to podcasts on everything. So she really just overwhelmed her with information in a good way and showed her how bad it was. And she took back the close relationship she had once had with her daughter by showing her how much she loved her and cared about her.
That's so wonderful.
I know. So that is just an amazing testimony. So if you're a parent out there and you're going through something like this, know that you aren't alone and that there is hope.
Yes. Not
every story is a story of hope, but there is hope out there, and no one is too far from being saved from this.
Yes.
And yeah, it's very inspiring. So definitely go read it. I read you some of the things in there, but there's a lot more detail that I think is really important. I know that we are at about 40 minutes, and we're trying to keep our podcast a little bit shorter for our viewers. I want to just end, though, Moses, with asking you what you're reading this week. We haven't done that in a while.
Yeah, okay, sure. So, first of all, thank you for sharing that story, Grace. It's just so encouraging.
Yeah.
And I hope it is for those listening and watching as well. Because, as Grace said, not every story ends that way. But I think parents are able to turn the corner on this. And I'm just so grateful for that. Okay, so I'm reading The Inheritance of Rome, Illuminating the Dark Ages, 400 to 1000. Chris Wickham. What'd you say?
I read that in school. That was
You
a
did,
book.
really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Do you like it?
It's very dry.
That's what I felt like. And we
It's
had
very
quizzes.
dry. Yeah, but the amount of information is amazing, and it's about essentially the states that rose up after the Roman Empire collapsed. So very interesting. I'm reading The Idea of Decline in Western History by Arthur Herman, which is about basically all these people who have preached doom and gloom throughout history and how they all turned out to be wrong. People like Sartre is one that I'm reading about now. And finally, I'm rereading the Screwtape Letters, which is so
a classic.
good.
That's so good.
So my wife and I are reading that out loud, and just the conversations that sparks, like, it is so spiritually healthy to read a book like that with your spouse or with anyone. Okay, so that's what I'm reading. Grace, what are you reading right now?
Before we started the podcast, Moses and I were arguing about who's reading more right now. Moses is only reading 3 books according to his Goodreads. According to my Goodreads, I'm reading 13, which isn't actually true because I am in finals week. But after finals week, I will be back to reading these books. I'm only going to list like 2, I think, because it will take a very long time. One of the ones that I just finished was called The Midnight Library, and it's a fiction work, and it was apparently one of the most popular fiction books of the year. It isn't a classic or anything, but sometimes I like to know what people are reading and see if it's actually any good. It actually was really good. Not as good as I was thinking, but it was definitely, I think I give it 4 stars.
Cool.
Could go into the concept. It is interesting. I think it's a good like beach read or vacation read because it doesn't take that much brain power.
Okay.
I'm also reading One Vote Away by Ted Cruz, How a Single Supreme Court Seat Can Change History. That's definitely interesting. I'm only a little bit of the way through that.
Interesting.
And I'm reading Love Thy Body by Nancy Pearcey as well. Those are just some of them. Actually, also one more. The Picture of Dorian Gray I'm reading.
Because
I never read that. That was one of the books that I didn't ever read, but it is a classic. I'm about halfway through. Very interesting. Very, very good. So, yeah, reading a lot right now, but love books.
That's great. It's great doing this podcast with Grace because we're both such book nerds.
We really are.
As well as politics nerds. So it's fun to be able to share that. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in this week. We have covered Vice President Kamala Harris. We've covered social studies standards in the state of Minnesota, hopefully made that somewhat interesting. And last of all, and probably most importantly, we covered a mom who helped her daughter come back from the brink of transgender identification. So make sure you like, comment, subscribe, give us a 5-star review if you're on iTunes. If you're on YouTube, hit that bell icon so you get a notification every time we release a new video, which is every week or more. And I'm Moses Bratchford. This is Grace Evans. Thank you so much for listening to or watching the Family Beacon podcast, where you can get the facts and stand for truth. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to or watching this episode of the Family Beacon podcast from Minnesota Family Council. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you're up to date on life, family, and religious freedom. You can follow us on Instagram at MN Family Council and subscribe to us on YouTube to watch our content. Get the facts, stand for truth.